Hello, everyone. I'm Gigi Godwin, President and CEO of the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you here today for today's virtual business accelerator on employer best practices to manage changing vaccine mandates. And our presentation today is brought to you by us, featuring Michael J. Neary and Nicole M. Berman of Lerch, and Brewer. So welcome all of our attendees, and there are quite a few of you today. Thank you for spending your time with us. Before we go too much further, I would be pleased to introduce to you our chairman of the Small Business Committee and chairwoman of our Small Business Committee, and second vice chair of our board of directors, Erin Allen, who is also president and CEO of Contemporaries. Erin, would you like to say a few words?
I would. Thank you, Gigi. And thanks so much, Michael and Nicole, for joining us today. I'm super excited for this event. I think it's going to be really helpful to all of our businesses out there. This is such a obviously changing target. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing what you guys have to share. And welcome to all of the businesses that are here. I think you guys will find it really valuable. And more importantly, I hope you'll join us for future meetings as well, because we have a lot of really great stuff planned for the team. That's it.
Thanks, Erin. Thanks so much for joining us, and thank you for your leadership leading the Accelerator series for the Chamber of Commerce. And I also wanted to acknowledge the incredible Chamber team that is bringing this event to you, our Manager of Events and Membership, Megan Foy, who is on our call. Thanks, Megan, for all the work you did. People saw your name on all sorts of things associated with this, so thank you for getting everybody registered. And our Director of Marketing and Communications, Alexis Reed. And Alexis will be helping us throughout, especially on our poll questions. So, it takes a team to make these things possible for our members. So thank you, team. And we're going to continue on then. So I'm excited about this presentation today because it's going to focus on how you can be proactive in managing the new vaccine mandates, even though they are pending, and in general, the employment climate and reality, while continuing to accelerate your company's success in this marketplace. This program will be of interest to business owners and those in executive leadership roles, or those of you who are human resource professionals for your companies. So thank you all for joining us. Key benefits from today. You'll be hearing a lot about healthcare requirements, employee complaints and questions, OSHA ETS requirements, injunctions, federal contracting requirements, and much, much more. All the things that you need to know as you're leading your organization. If you would like to have the slides after today's presentation and the audio from today's webinar, just reach out to us directly and we are happy to send them to you. So now a few poll questions. I know people are still signing on, but we're going to go ahead with some poll questions, and I'm going to ask Alexis Reed to go ahead and put them on the screen, and then she's going to share the results as they come in. So get ready, everybody, so that you can vote on these. The first one is, where is your business located? Montgomery County, Metro Maryland, which we define as from here to Baltimore, Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C., or outside that area. Please select one so that we know where you are calling in from today. Do we have people voting? Montgomery County, Metro Maryland, Northern Virginia, DC, or outside the Washington metro area. Oh, Montgomery County is the big winner today. All right, there we go. Next question. Do you have locations outside of Maryland? This is pretty straightforward. This is a yes or no. Do you have locations outside of Maryland, which means really employees, considering the topic, outside of Maryland? Yes, no question. Just want to have an idea of whether or not you've got multiple jurisdictions to concern yourself with. Do we have people voting? Okay, everybody, yes, we often say this in our advocacy, is that our employers have to deal with multiple jurisdictions. And this is more proof of that. All right, next poll question. In which industry is your company? Construction, nonprofit associations, professional services, healthcare, other. Those are big categories, I realize, and there's so many more. But just, again, construction, nonprofit or association, professional services, healthcare, other. And do we have people voting? We will soon see the results of that. And we have a combination of construction, nonprofit, and professional services. And we have a lot of other. So there we go. All right, we're going to continue on. Current number of full-time employees. We're trying to get a sense of the size of your companies. 1 to 50 employees, 51 to 100 employees, 101 to 250 employees, 251 to 500, or over 500. Again, under 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 250, 251 to 500, or over 500. Be good to get a sense of the size of our companies that have joined us today for this conversation. Oh, we have a mix. All right. And everybody can see the results on their screen. Okay, terrific. And does your organization have a vaccine policy? It's a yes/no question. A vaccine policy of some kind, either requiring vaccines or testing, but some sort of policy. Yes, or no policy at all would be a no. Does your organization have a vaccine policy or not? Yes or no? The vast majority of you do, and we have a percentage that do not. All right, you can see that. And last but not least, is your workforce 50% vaccinated, 75% vaccinated, 100% vaccinated, under 50, or you're not sure? Over 50, over 75, 100%, under 50, not sure. Okay, and the answer is we've got the majority, vast majority are over 75% vaccinated. So, and only a small number of you, or a small percentage, are not sure. But that's the over 75% are mostly vaccinated. Okay, great. Well, that gives us an idea of where all of you stand that joined us today. We appreciate that. So now on to introducing our guest presenters. First, it's truly a pleasure to introduce Michael J. Neary, attorney, Lerch, and Brewer. Michael Neary is an employment attorney working with businesses to comply with the rules regulating the workplace. He trains supervisors and employees on a wide range of topics, including preventing workplace harassment, compliance with wage and hour laws, avoiding discrimination claims, and understanding and preventing retaliation claims. Michael's clients include private schools, construction companies, developers, community associations, and closely held corporations. Executives and human resource managers find him to be the calm in the storm. Kind of a nice thing to say about somebody. And a reassuring presence amidst the heightened emotions that often accompany employee workplace issues and litigation. Michael's background is a Maryland native who attended Gonzaga College High School and Loyola University of Baltimore and the University of Maryland School of Law. So in his personal time and community life, he also serves as the board chair of Cornerstone Montgomery, and he very much enjoys coaching his 4 daughters in soccer and in basketball. So we were talking about that before we got started today. So that's fun. Thank you, Michael, for joining us today. And now it is truly a pleasure to introduce our other presenter, Nicole M. Behrman, Associate, Lerch, Early & Brewer. Nicole Behrman is an employment attorney who represents clients in a wide range of matters. Nicole has the motto of always going the extra mile for her people, for her clients, and her clients are the beneficiaries of her detail-oriented and strategic approach to achieving desired results. In her practice, Nicole has represented clients before the DC Superior Court, District Court for the District of Columbia, the EEOC, DC Office of Human Rights, and the DC Office of Administrative Hearings. She has litigated cases involving claims of discrimination, harassment, retaliation, FMLA interference and retaliation, wage and hour violations, breach of contract, and wrongful termination in violation of public policy. By way of background, Nicole earned her law degree from George Washington University School of Law and a bachelor's degree in government and politics and English language and literature from the University of Maryland. It's a Go Terp moment there. I know we have a lot of them on the call as well. A native of Howard County, Maryland, where her family still resides. Also enjoys in her personal time, she likes to cook and tries new restaurants and reads new books and practices yoga in her free time. So there's a lot for us to talk about after this webinar. Thank you both for being here. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Nicole and Michael. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gigi, and good morning to everyone. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you to the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce for the invitation to speak on such an important topic that's affecting countless businesses in America. As we all know, we're living through just unprecedented times. Hopefully, we're at the tail end of a devastating pandemic, and we're trying to work our way out. The pandemic had untold consequences for our nation in lost lives and in lost jobs. And coming out of that, the Biden administration issued its pathway out of the pandemic in September, which was an effort to kind of kickstart what was then a kind of a dwindling vaccination rate in the country. Central to that plan was a multi-pronged series of executive orders that were designed to force individuals who had not yet been vaccinated, that worked for the federal government, for federal contractors, for businesses participating in Medicare and Medicaid, as well as businesses with over 100 employees or 100 or more employees, to receive the COVID-19 vaccine as a condition of employment. The stated goal behind that pathway out of the pandemic is the concept of trying to prevent further spread of the coronavirus and really encourage individuals who are on the sidelines to embrace a full return to the workplace. We have come a long way from where we were during 2020 in regards to the state of the economy. We've gained a lot of the ground back through the help of vaccines throughout 2021. Large segments of the economy are now almost to where they were before the pandemic began. But we're still at a point where there are 5 million fewer people working now than there were before the pandemic. And the hope is expressed by the Biden administration is that the executive orders would encourage more individuals to get the vaccine. And ultimately that would foster a return from individuals who may be on the sidelines hesitant to get back into a normal work life and go back to work in physical offices throughout the United States, as important as that is for our country overall. With that kind of as the purpose of the mandates, it's important for us all to understand and talk about the potential negative ramifications of the federal vaccine mandate. It potentially can, we're blessed here in the DC metro area to have very high vaccination rates. Through the polling questions, this is similar to what I'm seeing, where most of my clients have high vaccination rates in this area, highly educated workforce, and close to levers of power and access to lots of independent individuals who can advise on vaccine efficacy. But in large parts of this country, the vaccine mandates could slow hiring, kind of exacerbate labor shortages, increase wage inflation, and accelerate automation for businesses that have that ability. So as we work through together where we're going to go as a business community in the face of these vaccine mandates, we have these competing interests. And not only do we have these competing interests, but we also have kind of a house divided here in this country. We have a growing number of states passing laws that directly conflict with the federal vaccine mandate. And businesses like you all are kind of stuck in the middle. I like to refer to it as, it's almost as if you're children of a marriage, a bad marriage. And how do you please one parent without offending the other? And so what we hope to do today is to kind of set the stage of where we are with these federal mandates, give you a refresher, most likely, on kind of what is required for each of the executive orders, talk to you about the state of the litigation, that broken down marriage that I referenced has resulted in an onslaught of litigation against these federal vaccine mandates. So kind of the latest and greatest as we sit here today, where the courts are in evaluating whether these federal vaccine mandates can proceed. But stepping back from that, the kind of the state of the nation on vaccine mandates, we hope to give you kind of a broader lens to think through and figure out where you want to go as your organization with mandates and what type of policies you want to have, regardless of what happens at the end of the day with the courts and with these federal mandates, so that you can be empowered to really set a course for your organization and not be opening up the paper every morning and figuring out, has the injunction been lifted or is there an injunction in place? Because what's been uniform since vaccines came online and businesses started to step in the forefront to impose vaccine mandates on their workforces, courts have uniformly held that businesses have that power, setting aside certain limited exceptions that we'll talk about today. Businesses have the power to make vaccination for COVID-19 a condition of continued employment. Now, certain states are outlawing that, but we want to be able to give you the tools to set your own course so you can make informed decisions and really try to get yourselves on firm footing as you move into 2022 in what continues to be a very challenging labor market. So with that introduction to the topic today, I'll turn it over to Nicole to start talking about the OSHA ETS mandate, which is the one that the Biden administration issued for businesses with 100 or more employees.
Thank you, Mike. So as Mike said, let's take a little refresher into the OSHA ETS and look at who is covered under the ETS and what the requirements are. So with regard to coverage, the ETS applies to private employers with 100 or more employees. Now, as far as how this 100 employees are counted, employees at all locations are counted, full-time and part-time employees are counted, employees at related entities can be counted if the entities handle safety matters as one company. And if an employer has 100 or more employees on the effective date of the ETS, then the employer is covered under the ETS. But if the employer hits the 100 employee threshold at any time while the ETS is in effect, then they would be covered under the ETS. And once an employer comes within the scope of the ETS, they stay within the scope of the ETS. So if you had 100 employees when the ETS became in effect, but you lost 3, you would still be covered under the ETS while it's still in effect. Now, there are certain workplaces that are excluded from the ETS, even if you have 100 or more employees, like workplaces subject to the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force guidance for federal contractors and subcontractors. That we'll talk about soon. And workplaces subject to the healthcare ETS. And even if your workplace is covered, not all of your employees might have to comply with the requirements of the ETS, like workers who telework, workers who work exclusively outdoors, or workers who don't report to the workplace with other people that are present. And if we could go to the next slide. Okay, so now that we've covered who is covered, let's turn to the requirements of the ETS. So first off, employers are required to determine the vaccination status of each of their employees, which seems like many of you have done already. After that, for employees that are vaccinated, employers must require those employees to submit proof of their vaccination status. And employers have to maintain records of all employees' vaccination status, regardless of whether or not they're vaccinated. They have to preserve copies of the proof of vaccination that they do receive, and they have to maintain a roster that includes the vaccination status for each and every employee. And if we could go to the next slide. Now, the ETS also has requirements related to testing, notification of positive results, and removal from the workplace after a positive test result, which is probably one of the most well-known provisions of the ETS. Under the ETS, unvaccinated employees reporting to a covered employer's workplace must take and provide a proof of a negative test at least once every 7 days. If you're an employee who's regularly coming into work, you would have to provide that proof once every 7 days. If you're not regularly coming to the office, you would just have to provide it once 7 days before you decide to come into the office. And all employees must notify their employer. So regardless if they're vaccinated or not, they must notify their employer if they test positive for COVID-19, and they must be immediately removed from the workplace until they receive either a negative COVID-19 test result, they meet the CDC's return to work criteria, or they receive a recommendation from a licensed healthcare provider to return back to work. And again, under the ETS, employees who are not fully vaccinated must also wear face coverings in addition to the testing when indoors and when occupying a vehicle with another person for work purposes. Now, there are limited exceptions to the masking requirement, and they include things like when the employee is alone in a room with floor-to-ceiling walls and a closed door, and also for a limited time while an employee is eating or drinking in the workplace. The ETS also requires employers to provide leave to employees to receive a COVID-19 vaccination and also to recover from the side effects of a vaccination. So first, under the ETS, employers must provide a reasonable amount of time to each employee to receive their primary COVID-19 vaccine dose or doses, depending on which vaccine you get, during work hours, including up to 4 hours of paid time at the employee's pay for each dose of the primary vaccination. Anytime past that 4 hours would be unpaid leave. The ETS also requires employers to provide reasonable time and paid sick leave to employees to recover from side effects of the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, in the ETS, OSHA doesn't say what reasonable time is, but they have published an FAQ on this subject, and according to that FAQ, a reasonable time is up to 2 days. In addition to the testing and masking and the leave requirements, under the ETS, employers are required to draft and implement a written COVID-19 policy that would incorporate these requirements And also, again, the main premise is that employees have to be either vaccinated or submit to COVID-19 testing. And finally, the last requirement, employers are required to notify their employees of the requirements of the ETS and the written policy they implement, certain CDC guidance, like the isolation guidance of when you test positive for COVID-19 or you experience symptoms, the ETS's prohibition on discharging, discriminating, or retaliating against employee for either reporting any work-related illnesses or a violation of the ETS, and the criminal penalties associated with knowingly supplying false statements or documents. And if we could go to the next slide, please. And in addition to the OSHA ETS, as Mike mentioned earlier, the Biden administration also issued an executive order regarding COVID-19 protective measures with government contractors. So way back in September, which seems like a long time ago, President Biden issued Executive Order 14042, which requires contract clauses to be inserted into certain contracts and contract-like instruments. These clauses require contractors and subcontractors to comply with any COVID-19 guidance issued by the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force. After the executive order was published, on September 24th, the task force issued its guidance, which has 3 protocols that covered contractors and subcontractors must comply with. The first protocol is that covered contractor employees must be fully vaccinated for COVID-19 by January 18th, 2022. The exceptions are in limited circumstances where the employee is entitled to a reasonable accommodation, which we'll discuss later. And for you guys, a covered contractor employee is any employee working on a covered contract or in connection with a covered contract, or working at a covered contractor workplace. The on or in connection with a covered contract includes employees supporting covered contracts, but not necessarily working on the meat of the covered contracts, like in HR or legal or billing. It also includes employees working remotely. A covered contractor workplace is also any workplace where an employee working on or in connection with a government contract is likely to be present during the period of performance of a covered contract. So this is a pretty expansive definition. Now, the second requirement under the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force guidance is that covered contractor employees and visitors must comply with any masking or physical distancing policies while they're at that covered contractor workplace, including following any applicable CDC guidance. And the final requirement of the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force guidance is that covered contractors will have to designate an individual to coordinate COVID-19 workplace safety efforts at covered contractor workplaces. And this would include notifying employees of workplace requirements and making sure that employees comply with the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force guidance. Now I'll turn it back over to Mike to discuss the CMS vaccine mandate.
Thanks, Nicole. And just to pick up on the complexity of some of the issues that federal contractors have been having to deal with, I know that Nicole's weekend was interrupted trying to figure out how broadly the federal contractor rules apply to affiliates of, an entity that's connected to a traditional federal contractor. And the rules are very expansive and can really drift into other segments of a business that would not necessarily be, that don't themselves have a federal government contract. So it's not limited only to federal government contractors. You want to kind of look holistically at the business, and there's a lot of nuances there. And it's just, it's a lot to get your arms around in terms of how far the federal contracting executive order extends. And I'm sure Nicole will be talking a little bit about that in the discussion about the current state of litigation, but just wanted to kind of stress that point. So turning to the CMS, the vaccine rule. So this is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and was one of the prongs of the Biden administration's pathway out of the pandemic. they issued an interim final rule that applies to all entities that are providers, or Medicare or Medicaid providers, and are regulated by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. And it's supposed to be and work in conjunction with the OSHA temporary emergency rule for employers of 100 or more. So it was kind of the whole pathway out of the pandemic was a package deal. All these items were supposed to work together. And so what the CMS rule requires is that covered facilities have to establish a policy requiring all staff and contractors in a covered facility to receive the first dose of the 2-dose COVID vaccine or the 1-dose shot by December 5th, 2021. And they all staff must have received be fully vaccinated by January 4, 2022. At this time, the rule doesn't apply to any sort of booster shots, although that may come down the pipe at some time. This was the main rule that did not have, unlike the OSHA rule, it doesn't have kind of a testing option for the unvaccinated. So under the CMS rule, there's really only exemptions for individuals who submit and have an approved religious exemption, a religious basis for not getting the vaccine, or a medically approved reason for not getting the vaccine. It applies to current and future employees of covered facilities. So whether they're clinically, they're providing clinical care or not, and it broadly defines employees. So you're not just talking about individuals who may be providing hands-on care. It's administrative staff, and extends broadly to all those sorts of employees that are working in these CMS regulated facilities. And so you will have to consider and give a process to allow for accommodations for the religious and medical exemption requests. It excludes staff that provide telehealth services outside of the facility setting and that don't have direct contact with patients. So if your facility uses contractors or employees that provide telehealth, that's not going to be a requirement. And it extends also to contractors that you work with that come into your facilities. And CMS requires you to track who's vaccinated. You have to get certain documentation to demonstrate that the individuals are vaccinated, and you need to document your consideration of accommodation requests. So there's a kind of a paperwork component to this, and making sure that you have sound records if you're ever audited for compliance with this rule. That's kind of broad strokes on the CMS requirement. So I'll turn it back over to Nicole to give you all an update on the latest and greatest of where these rules stand in the courts.
Thanks, Mike. So as Mike mentioned earlier, unsurprisingly, there has been litigation on all 3 vaccine mandates. In fact, currently all 3 are stayed nationwide. With regards to the OSHA ETS, so that's again the rule that applies to private employers with 100 or more employees. The ETS was stayed by a federal court of appeals in November, and it prohibits the OSHA from enforcing the ETS currently. And in staying the rule, the court stated that it's likely that OSHA exceeded its authority in issuing the ETS. The court also had some constitutional concerns about the ETS, namely that it regulated non-economic inactivity, so someone's choice to remain unvaccinated, and that falls within the state's police power. The other concern it had is that separation of powers principles, it said, cast doubt over the OSHA mandate's assertion that have unlimited power to control individual conduct under the guise of a workplace regulation. So currently the cases challenging the OSHA ETS have been consolidated into one, and it will be heard by the Sixth Circuit, which will make a determination on whether the OSHA ETS is ultimately valid. And since the Fifth Circuit has issued its say, OSHA has published a notice on its website stating that it suspended all activities to implement and enforce the ETS while the order is in place. Excuse me. With regards to the federal contractor vaccine mandate, just yesterday, a federal court in Georgia issued a preliminary injunction, which again enjoined the government from enforcing the federal contractor vaccine mandate nationwide. And this is, again, the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force requirements in President Biden's executive order on government contractors. In this case, interestingly, the plaintiff argued that the president issued the executive order on federal contractor vaccine mandates pursuant to this Federal Property and Administrative Services Act that governs the administration and management of contracting. And through this act, Congress had delegated the president powers related only to these purposes. And the plaintiff said, well, Congress has not authorized the president to make OSHA emergency temporary standards or federal contractor vaccine mandates, which it considers a public health regulation through the authority Congress delegated. And then finally, again, the CMS mandate. Last week, a federal judge in Kentucky issued a preliminary injunction prohibiting the government from enforcing the CMS mandate nationwide. Again, in doing so, the plaintiffs said that the CMS bypassed what are traditional notice and comment procedures that administrative agencies have to follow when issuing a rule, and they did this without good cause. The court also said that the plaintiffs will likely succeed in its argument that the CMS acted outside of its authority in issuing the rule. And again, it infringes on states' police powers to enact legislation for the public good. So right now, we're going to have to stay tuned with regards to whether there are any appeals for the decision to stay these mandates. And then also, ultimately, the final outcome of these cases and whether these mandates will be legally upheld. Now, notably though, for a court to issue a preliminary injunction, the court has to determine that there's a likelihood that the plaintiffs will prevail on the merits of the case. And this has happened in all three cases. So we'll see ultimately what the final decisions are with regards to whether or not these mandates will be legally upheld. But again, for right now, the enforcement of all three mandates, the OSHA ETS, the federal contractor vaccine mandate, and the CMS mandate are currently stayed. And back to you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. So that's kind of the first battle in the war over these federal vaccine mandates that will be played out through the court system. I think the Biden administration's been very clear that they're continuing to advocate for their policies in court. So it could be one of those things that ultimately ends up in the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to decide, which could be many months down the road. And so where does that leave all of you? It sounds like a lot of you on this webinar have already implemented policies. Maybe some of those policies were as a result of the federal vaccine mandates. Maybe you already had those in the works. Maybe those policies comply to a T to every one of these executive orders. Maybe they don't. And so I assume some of you on this webinar are really kind of struggling and scratching your head, figuring out where to go from here. And so, I think first and foremost, you kind of want to step back and as you're evaluating the situation and say, what do you want to do, regardless of what the government tells you on this topic? I mean, as I tried to plant the seed at the beginning, there are significant benefits to these vaccines. I don't think there's any dispute about that in the scientific community. Whether it's the right move to compel people who don't want to get it to do it or not is really a political judgment. But as a business organization, if you're being told that the science says if all our employees are vaccinated, the spread of COVID goes down 5-fold and severe disease goes down 10-fold or something like that, isn't it better for my business to ensure that everybody who works here is fully vaccinated? And so maybe you say, I don't really care at this point how these government orders end up, playing out in court. Maybe you say it's time for me as a business to have a full mandate. Maybe you say, look, I don't want to force anybody, but I want to have a policy that says you either get the vaccine or you test people. And so what I would encourage you to do, to the extent you haven't done it already, or if you really have only acted as a result of government orders and directives starting in September, is really to get your brain trust together and talk to your key constituents within your organization and figure out what it is you as an organization want to do and set that course. And in this area, Maryland, DC, and Virginia, you don't have at this point much concern about a mandate running afoul of a state or local law that would really prohibit you from doing that as a business. So given prior court decisions that I referenced at the beginning, you have flexibility in this area to impose a mandate and to set really the reasonable procedures that you want to follow and you want your employees to follow. I know a number of you on this call, based on the polling, have work sites outside of the DMV. And so you definitely need to be mindful of what's going on in those states and make sure that whatever it is you want to implement does not run afoul of a state-based law. When it comes to vaccines and public health matters, states and localities are traditionally, in the history of the country, have had kind of been on the forefront of rules and orders and opinions about what would be required from a public health perspective. And so states are acting, they continue to act. New York City acted, I think, this week, indicating they're going to require vaccines for businesses in New York City. So it's not just a locality that may be prohibiting it, it's a locality that may be requiring it. And so you want to have good counsel, either an internal resource who's going to be monitoring this stuff in the states you operate in, or an outside advisor who can help alert you to changes in the law, because this stuff is changing so rapidly. It's oftentimes Nicole and I kind of feel like our heads spinning, trying to really keep track. And it's not typically how the law works, right? I mean, most of the laws that get passed in this country happen in a normal process, and there's a start date that's typically 6 to 8 months out so that the business community can adapt. This stuff is happening through really, a stroke of the pen, and it really is hard to keep track of it. So you need to have a team together to monitor, what it is going on in the areas you're operating in. I think that when the vaccines first came online, and my firm and I participated in webinars on the topic of what to do in light of the vaccines, we were all learning. Everybody was trying to understand the new reality, the new world. There were no mandates at that point. And I think one of our first principles was, let's communicate with our people. And I think that still holds true, even though we're many months into this and the government is speaking on the state, local, and federal level. It's still key to communicate with your employees about what you're doing and why. We get lost in our own little worlds once we walk out of the workplace. We have our own sources of information that we rely on, individuals, and you don't know where people are on this stuff. You may be hypersensitive to it all and be on top of the ins and outs of, should I get a booster, should I not? You may know the science front and back, but your employees may not have a clue. They might be scratching their heads at what's the story with these boosters now. And so I think what businesses should do to stay ahead of this is really increase the communication at this point. You know, we're learning a tremendous amount about how these vaccines are, you know, can slow the spread. We see in the news all the time breakthrough cases, but, you know, talking about what that really means, and that's not, you know, a breakthrough case doesn't mean that the vaccines are totally worthless. So I think to the extent you haven't done this, I've had a lot of clients who've had a great deal of success bringing in outside independent advisors, scientists, medical professionals to do lunch and learns with their employees, just to really talk it through, try to cut through a lot of the politics of it all, right? And educate people on what the vaccines are. And then also bring in those same advisors to help you create your own policy, and then to talk to your workforce about why you're doing what you're doing. You know, I think that one of the following September, when the Biden administration started talking about the pathway out of the pandemic, and we were all anticipating these executive orders coming out, the first instinct for the organizations that kind of were reluctant to impose a mandate, the first instinct was, okay, now we have to impose it and we can just blame the federal government, right? That'll be our messaging. So when our employees are mad at us, there's going to be a segment that's mad at us, we can blame the federal government. Well, now, you know, we've got these executive orders that are now under nationwide injunctions. And so that's not really a good scapegoat anymore, right? If you took that approach, you're probably getting calls now from your employees saying, well, now, you know, it's enjoined, it's unlawful. Why do I have to get the vaccine? And so I think what you should really do is when you set that policy, you want to be kind of getting your talking points together and your messaging together about, you know, why we're going down this road. We're doing this because we work with a vulnerable population. We work with members of the public on a day-to-day basis. Or maybe we just want people back in the office, and we have, you know, 10% of our workforce that won't come back in the office because we have 10% of our workforce that's not vaccinated. So message and communicate. You know, help employees lower the barriers to getting a vaccine, right? So part of the OSHA order is the concept that if somebody goes out and gets the vaccine and has an adverse reaction and has to miss a day at work, you know, you're not going to ding them for that. Consider implementing stuff like that into your policy. It could build goodwill with your employees. And, you know, all the things that you can do, the low-hanging fruit, to show your employees that you're not just a dictator sitting up high in some boardroom, but you're trying to protect them, you're trying to protect others, and you're trying to minimize the burden on individuals who are the holdouts, to encourage them and entice them to get the vaccine for the betterment of everybody in your organization. You know, one point that we talked about in the planning sessions for this webinar is what's called the standard of care. And as you develop your policy and figure out what you want to do with COVID-19 vaccine mandates, you know, keep in mind the standard of care. It's an evolving thing. It's really a kind of a concept in tort law, right? We think of tort law, we think of a car accident, who's at fault, can you sue them? But businesses have a standard of care, regardless of what the ins and outs of particular federal, state, or local rules are, right? Businesses have an obligation to their employees, to their visitors, to have a reasonably safe work environment, right? You couldn't implement some hazardous, you know, business policy without potential consequence from a plaintiff's attorney arguing you violated a standard of care. And so the farther we get down the road in the vaccine, after the, you know, the vaccines rollout, it's becoming more acceptable. They're now fully authorized for the most part. And we have businesses who have implemented vaccine mandates left and right. Maybe in your industry, maybe you're in a healthcare space and everybody's got it. Well, if you don't have one at some point, it's potential an enterprising plaintiff's attorney is going to say, you know what, I represent one of the visitors to your work environment who got COVID there and they had a severe outcome. And you're liable because you didn't do what was now reasonable, what was now the standard of care. And there's probably going to be fights about that for sure. And that's no guarantee that they win that case or that becomes the standard of care. But it's certainly possible. The more ingrained these vaccines become in our day-to-day lives, you need a vaccine to go to see a show in some cities, to go to a restaurant in some cities. As it becomes more and more a part of a requirement to function in society, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that is going to be a line of attack that plaintiffs' attorneys are going to try to capitalize on behalf of their clients. And so, I'm not saying that to scare you or anything, but as you evaluate what you want to do in regards to a vaccine policy, you got to keep that in mind, regardless of the ins and outs of the vaccine mandates. And so I just wanted to stress upon that. So if you could go to the next slide, we are, hopefully you've been inspired to really take a fresh look at what you are doing with your vaccine policies. And so you're going to do that. You're going to come up with a great policy that works for your business based on, how many employees you have, what segments in the industry you're in. And now you want to try to put pen to paper and create that policy. So what are some best practices to do that? I think you want to have a broad, you don't want one individual responsible for setting the policy for the organization, right? So if we're writing the policy, you've already got a brain trust together to figure out what our policy is going to be. You want to keep that group together as you draft and finalize a policy. So you want to have multiple stakeholders looking at it and thinking through, what does this mean for this segment of our business? Because a one-stop shop may work for a small organization that does one type of thing, right? We're all accountants here. We all work remotely, or we all work in a small office building. There's no, we don't deal with the public here. Everybody's doing Zooms now. But if you're a complicated business with different segments and different job responsibilities, you might not really understand fully how this would play out with a particular segment. So definitely keep a broad group of individuals together with various vantage points within your organization to help as you craft the policy. I think given the complexity of the conflicting state, local, and federal requirements and expectations, you do want a good advisor to be involved and review what it is that you all have created. As hard as it is, if you're in a lot of different states, keep in mind that the more complicated a policy is, the harder it is going to be to implement. So if you can have a policy that's compliant with every jurisdiction you're in, that should be your goal. It may be impossible because unfortunately there's such a hot divide over this topic that there's just 180-degree conflicting requirements in some states versus others. But if uniformity is not possible, let's try to get as close to uniformity as we can. And that may be in regards to, testing. If we're going to have testing, how's that going to play out? Who's going to be responsible for it? What day of the week are employees going to have to give us their testing results? So really keep that in mind to try to simplify it as much as possible. And it's hard work. It really is because of the nuances at each level. But maybe not everybody has, but I've definitely seen the policy manual that has 92 exhibits, and this one's applicable in DC, this one's applicable in California, this one's applicable in Florida, this one's applicable in Maryland. It's hard to implement, and it's, your head spins. And so give thought to maybe the easier course is just to figure out what the most restrictive standard is and abide by that everywhere. Because it's also, if you have conflicting policies and standards, employees can get mad, right? Like I'm in this state and I have to do this, but somebody else who does my exact same job in that state doesn't have to do that. It can create morale issues. And so just give thought to that. I think you want to absolutely have exemptions for whatever mandates you impose, whether it be a testing mandate or a vaccine mandate. You want to have that. You want to have the exemptions for a religiously based accommodation and a medically based accommodation under the Civil Rights Act, the Federal Civil Rights Act, and the state and local counterparts. There are requirements to accommodate an individual's sincerely held religious belief. And you want to have an exemption for those who can't get the vaccine or can't test for whatever medically based reason. You want to be mindful of that and have those written policies in place before you go live with whatever it is. And you want to communicate with your stakeholders and employees. Here's our policy, here's our process. You want to assign a team to monitor implementation of the policy and request for accommodation. You want to give those folks some training. It's hard sometimes to really differentiate the valid religious accommodation requests from the invalid ones. It's challenging. I've seen, and I know Nicole has as well, seen a number of religious accommodation requests since the vaccine mandates started to take hold. I don't know if anyone's seen the movie The Big Lebowski, but there's actually a website devoted to the dude lifestyle. And so we had one come through. It was a preacher a preacher of the dude lifestyle, and it was trying to get out from under a vaccine mandate. So you'll see everything under the sun. But if you have the same individuals evaluating them, you're going to have a consistent process and a consistent application of your principles and your policies to these vaccine exemption requests as they come through. And so for the more complicated ones, you probably want to be reaching out to an advisor to help you walk through it. And to the extent you have an internal legal resource, definitely get them involved and have that process filter through them so that you don't have any foot faults. And once everything's in place and it's all rolling out, you want to step up your communication and you want to continue with your incentives, right? So some organizations had incentives to get the vaccine, and that may be something that you want to continue to do, even though you might have now a punitive aspect of it. Incentivizing them might take some of the sting out of it if you have holdouts who really don't want to get it, and they're only going to get it if you force them. Well, maybe it takes some of the sting out if you give them an extra PTO day or something along those lines. And I'll stress again here, the education component of this is very important because this stuff is divisive for, unfortunately, it's become very divisive in our country. I'm sure you're all dealing with that with your workforces. And so the more you can get independent, non-political folks who are trained on these issues and educated on the ins and outs of this to come speak with your people, I think the better off you'll be. And you might not win might not convince them on a broader level of whether they should be forced to do this or not. But you never know, you might be able to convince some of your folks to just, that it's in the best interest of them and their family to go get the vaccine. And so I would continue to do that. And so if you go to the next slide, we'll kind of step back from all the ins and outs of the policy and formulating the policy, and just kind of talk about where we are. What are the key takeaways that you all should walk away from this, hopefully with? You know, the federal mandates are enjoined. What that means that they're not effective nationwide. We saw this play out on various executive orders in the last administration. Some of those nationwide injunctions lasted the entirety of the previous administration. And so some of his executive orders never became effective. Is that going to happen here? Your guess is as good as mine. I definitely would put my money that all of these are definitely going to the Supreme Court, absent some drastic change in the science of these vaccines, or the Biden administration reconsiders what it's done. Where they're going to land is anybody's guess. But right now, you as a business are not under any of these mandates. Does that mean we stop? To the extent you've all already expended a tremendous time, money, and effort moving towards compliance, does that mean you should stop? I don't think so. I think it's possible that these mandates are revived. You know, it's certainly possible. But the uncertainty of it all, just kind of throwing in the towel of what you've already done, you've probably already communicated a great deal to your employees. And so I don't think it's worth throwing in the towel. I think you want to continue on your course, trying to comply, particularly if you're a federal government contractor and the federal money is like the lifeblood of your business. Do you really want to be behind the eight ball when you know the current administration is pushing the mandate and it's currently enjoined, but do you want to be scrambling if the injunction is lifted? Because if it's lifted, you're not going to have a tremendous amount of lead time. So I think you keep moving forward in trying to comply with these orders. And where I think the injunctions play into this is, in my view, when you start getting into, I mentioned that complicated affiliate issue, right? So if you're a business that has many segments, many organizational components, and you have one segment that's its own separate entity, but maybe you share payroll, but that other entity is the federal contractor. And everyone's always looked at that and said, that's our federal contracting entity. But you have affiliates and employees are going back and forth, and are we really now subject to the federal mandate here in this other business? I think when you get into kind of those tangentially removed areas that you would have significant consequences for your business, maybe the injunctions are a basis for you to say, we're going to pause before we say, yeah, we're going to deem that affiliate entity under the auspices of this federal government contracting mandate. If you're, trying to figure out whether or not you're a CMS provider, you're not really sure. Maybe you kind of take a breath and you pause. If you're way behind the eight ball and your business really doesn't want to do this, you don't really want to do this, you don't have a mandate, your workforce doesn't want to do it, you're going to lose people, maybe you kind of monitor and pause a little bit. But I still think even if you don't go live with it, you'd be well served to get your house in order. If you're going to fall squarely with under one of these mandates, I think you want to spend the time to figure out what you're going to do if the mandates become effective, because you don't want to be scrambling. So even if it's in the back burner and you're getting your advisors to have everything ready, I think it's time well spent. So I would say that if you're down the road towards compliance, you've already communicated with your people, you spent a lot of time getting the policies together, I wouldn't just throw in the towel now. You've already done all the work. You've probably already made, a lot of enemies in your workforce. And so it's also important to keep in mind that it's not just the holdouts that you've got to be mindful of. You've got, the employees who are vaccinated. None of this affects them because they've already done it all. They've got their vaccine, they've got their boosters, and they're looking at you saying, what are you doing to protect me? And so you may want to keep going because you've already put all this time trying to comply, because you don't want to lose people who might not feel it's a safe environment if you give up now. So I think you keep going if you've already got it in process. If you're behind the 8 ball, maybe you've got a little bit of breathing room here, but I do recommend you start moving towards compliance. I think that's wise. That's the right thing to do so that you're not caught behind the 8 ball. And this is all going to change, right? Like the states that are out there that are passing laws, a lot of these states don't even have legislatures that are in session through every day of the year. So a lot of the states that are out there that haven't acted to either require mandates or vaccines or prohibit vaccine mandates, they're probably going to be acting when their legislative sessions get going. So you've got to maintain that level of flexibility. But I think that you're well served to continue to push yourselves to look at what is best for your organization, to look at how would we comply with this. If you're already working towards compliance, keep going. And then, let's revisit how we're communicating this, right? You could have been an early adopter of a vaccine mandate, and so you've already got your communication messaging down. You've already talked to your folks, and you've already explained to them why you're doing what you're doing. And so when this federal vaccine mandate stuff came out, you were ahead of the game. If you really only started moving towards implementing a vaccine mandate when the path out of the pandemic came forth, and you took the tack that we have to do this now because of the federal mandates, I think you do owe it to your folks and to kind of rethink your messaging on this. And if you keep going down the path of the vaccine mandate, you want to come up with the reasons why you're doing what you're doing, even though your employees are reading in the newspaper that these things are enjoined. And so I think that the time is right for those businesses who are in that spot to kind of think through, if we are going to push forward, all right, let's have our messaging ready to go. We understand these injunctions are in place. We're still going to move forward because of X, Y, and Z. We want to protect our workforce. We want to be competitive in the marketplace. We owe it to our individuals, the people who come here to visit us, to create a safe environment. This stuff's not going away. And so maybe that's one of your reasons. Yeah, we know it's enjoined, but things are changing. Everything's moving towards requiring it. We're just going to push forward. But you want to think through those talking points to be ready when those inevitable questions come up, because people watch the news and read the newspapers or read it on their phones, wherever they're reading it. And then the other thing you want to consider to avoid the whole great resignation that we're all living through is continuing to evaluate your work from anywhere or work from home plans to mitigate loss of talent, right? So if you drop a vaccine mandate on your workforce, but you say if you're working from home, you're not subject to this because you're not coming into our place of business, right? Maybe you want to continue to refine and allow people that option if it's possible to help mitigate the potential loss of talent, right? So if you have 20% of your workforce is not vaccinated and you put this vaccine mandate in place and you're potentially going to lose a decent amount of your workforce and they're key contributors, maybe you can find a way to let them work from home so that they don't have to be subject to this. And so give that some thought. I think that's a takeaway. I would say this is kind of a universal thing that I'm advising people at the moment, but you're going to have contingency plans for losing people in this market, right? I mean, it's an incredibly difficult market to maintain your talent. People take it as a given that if they put their hand up in the marketplace, they can find a place that's going to pay them a little bit more, maybe not have, not require me to come into the office 3 days a week. And so you need a plan for loss of talent. And this could be part of it, right? Like a vaccine mandate could be something that compels people to leave your organization. Hopefully that's not the case, but it could be another factor. And so I think you want to be looking at your current workload, figuring out where you're most vulnerable to departures, and talk about ways in which you can disperse work quickly. It may be a departure. It may be someone goes out on medical leave for a severe case of COVID. But I think you want to, as an organization, this is just one part of the broader Great Resignation framework, but this could be a reason, the vaccine mandate, why people leave. And so you want to have your contingency plans in place. Where are we going to look for talent? How are we going to recruit? How quickly can we do it? And just be ready with kind of contingency plans in place, so you're not caught flat-footed if that superstar worker says, "Thank you for your mandate. I'm going to go elsewhere," so that you can quickly turn and move forward and get the work done that needs to get done. The final piece of takeaway is, be ready for, social media, public relations problems, particularly if you've got a large segment of your workplace that's not vaccinated, and you're anticipating losing a lot of folks when your policy goes live, if you do a vaccine mandate. But have a strategy in place if a lot of those employees kind of go out in the public square and start bashing you. Your messaging is good internally to keep your internal folks calm, but also potentially externally, depending on, in this day and age, how quickly some of these reputational risk components can kind of take off. So it's a lot to take in. There is, a wealth of resources online at this point. We try to write about it on our Lerch and Brewer blog to try to stay up to date. You can go to our website, lerchearly.com, to sign up for the blog, and you'll get our latest postings. But there are other resources out there. I'm sure a lot of you have trusted advisors. If you don't, definitely you want to make some good friends so that you can bounce ideas off of individuals. Because when I'm working with clients, the worst thing I never want a relationship where my clients feel they can't just call and bounce an idea off me. Mike, is this a problem? Is this a concern? Because they're fearful that they're going to get a big bill. So you want those relationships with people in your networks, because you don't want to stick your head in the sand and say, I can't call anybody. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm doing my best with this stuff, because it's changing so rapidly. You want to have a broad network of advisors who can help you kind of spot issues and say, no, this is a big deal. You can't do that in Florida anymore. Sorry. So those are some of the takeaways. I really appreciate the time here. We've left some time for questions if any have come through in the chat, or if you have them now. I think there's a chat function. So please submit the questions. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. I'm sure you're all sick of hearing my voice, so I'll let Nicole handle some of these questions so you can hear her voice a little bit. But best of luck in navigating this. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, so the first question that we have in the chat box is, should we in general accept medical claims for waivers if explained and signed by a doctor? Should we verify if doctor is legitimate? Look up online, not calling the doctor. Well, if you have an exemption request that is signed by a doctor that explains that the employee can't receive a vaccination because of a medical condition and adequately explains that, then you would move on to the next step in the process, such as engaging in the interactive process with employees to determine whether or not you can accommodate them as a company it doesn't impose an undue hardship. If you have questions with regards to some of the information the employee submitted for the claim for a medical waiver, you could always ask the employee for release and gather more information to determine whether or not you can move forward to that next step. The next question is in the chat box is, if a faith community states that they are opposed to products that use fetal cells in production and or testing, but also states that without alternatives, it is an individual choice, the faith community will neither bless nor condemn a person for their choice. Should we reject the waiver request since the person's faith community would allow vaccination? So this is a really interesting question, and the EEOC has actually issued guidance on this topic because a lot of people have had that question. And so with regards to religious exemption requests, generally the employee has to state a sincerely held religious belief. And the employer can only ask follow-up questions if there's an objective basis for questioning that religious belief. Now, the EEOC guidance makes clear that even if the individual maybe has a belief that doesn't necessarily completely comply with their religious entity, and it might conflict with what that religious entity is saying, that can still be a sincerely held religious belief. The next step of that process, though, would again to see, can you accommodate that employee's religious request for an exemption? And then the next question states, can you ask a prospective employee if they are COVID vaccination prior to hiring? Yes, you can ask a prospective employee if they've received a COVID vaccination prior to hiring, but you cannot ask them any other questions after that. So you can't follow up and ask the question, well, why? So you would have to only leave it at, are they vaccinated? And I would also say that with regards to accepting not only requests for religious exemptions, requests for medical exemptions, and also asking this vaccination information, you want to check your state law, because there are states, as Mike has said previously, that have implemented laws with regards to medical exemptions to vaccine policies, religious exemptions to vaccine policies, other exemptions to vaccine policies, and also whether or not you can make choices or decisions on someone's employment based off their vaccination status. So before you do engage in any of these actions, we would strongly suggest that talk to your advisor and check to make sure if there are any state or local laws that are going to affect your running and your implementation of your COVID-19 vaccination policies. Okay, the next question is, who is responsible for paying for the COVID-19 testing for employees who have exemptions to the federal contractor mandate? Now, the federal contractor vaccine mandate, which we talked about earlier, that requires covered federal contractors and subcontractors to get vaccinated if they're working on or in connection with a covered contract, or if they're working at a covered contractor workplace, is actually silent with regards to who pays for the testing. That's also the same with OSHA ETS. The OSHA ETS does not require employers to pay for testing as well. However, again, your state or local law could have requirements with regards to employers paying for expenses employees incur as a result of their employment. So before you implement a policy and don't allow for employees to be reimbursed for expenses, I would check with your state or local law or your counselor to see if you can move forward with that policy. The next question is if an individual has an approved accommodation, is it okay for an employer to pay for those weekly testing, where those just choose to opt out for personal reasons would pay for testing? You can offer that as an accommodation to pay for the testing, but again, make sure you don't have any other requirements under your state or local law to pay for all expenses incurred as a result of testing.
So to jump off on that, I think Florida, the new Florida law, I think, is requiring businesses to pay for the testing. So you couldn't have that distinction between the two. You'd have to pay. If you had business in Florida, you'd have to pay for the testing.
It depends wherever you are. There's a lot to take in. Okay, the next question is, as an FC, how should we word our vaccination required in our labor board postings? Also, can we alert recruiters that we require vaccinations as a company policy? I believe FC means federal contractor. Again, in your job postings, if you're allowed by state law to require vaccinations, I understand now that the federal contractor vaccine mandate is enjoined. Definitely want to talk with a counselor if you also have a state law that conflicts with that for how to move forward. But assuming you're good to go, if you want to still require vaccines pursuant to the federal contractor vaccine mandate, I would definitely suggest wording in any postings or to recruiters that although you'll require vaccines, you're going to provide accommodations for those with disabilities or sincerely held religious beliefs as required by law. Okay. Is an employer required to pay for COVID leave even if it has not been accrued? This might be referring to, and I apologize if this is not, I'm not sure if you're referring to the OSHA ETS of where you have to pay for leave to receive a COVID-19 vaccination and also to recover from COVID-19 side effects for receiving the vaccination. Under the OSHA ETS, employers are required to pay for 4 hours of leave for an employee to receive an injection. That's up to 4 hours. After that, the leave is unpaid. However, that leave is in addition to any other leave your employees have. So you can't require an employee to take sick leave or vacation leave in order to get that COVID-19 injection. With regards to leave, if an employee needs to recover from side effects, employers can require employees to pay or, to use their sick leave, or if they don't have any distinctions between sick, PTO, vacation, you can require employees to use that leave. However, if an employee does not have any leave available to them, then you would have to provide them additional paid leave. You can't make them incur a negative leave balance or take unpaid leave if they don't have any. And I would again caution that there are some state laws that do have requirements with regards to employer COVID-19 vaccination and COVID-19 vaccination recovery leave. DC is one of those that have been newly implemented. So I would definitely urge you when you are drafting your policy and you're including this and you're making a policy for workers on whether or not and how much we're going to provide, check your state or local law to make sure you're also complying with that in addition to the OSHA ETS if that's what you're basing your policy on. If you don't pay for a test, an employee quits, is it a consecutive discharge? I think that's going to depend on the circumstances of what happened. But again, talk to your counselor. All right. I don't think I see any more questions.
Thanks, Nicole. Appreciate it.
That was a great presentation, Michael and Nicole. And I do believe that we have our board member from Lerch Early, who's also former board chair, that's on the call. And Alexis Reed, I was hoping that you could help Steve Robbins jump on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Well, I just want to listen, Gigi, thank you so much. And Aaron, first of all, Aaron, it's great to see you. I feel like I haven't seen you in 2 years, which is probably true. But it's great to see you online. And Gigi, always a pleasure to see you too.
Thank you.
I just wanted to just jump on for a minute to, first of all, thank the chamber. Gigi's right. I am a former chair of the chamber, and I've been also serving as the chair of our public safety awards for the last 100 years. And so not only me, but my firm has very unique ties with the Montgomery County Chamber. And Gigi, I just want to thank you and Aaron and the committee for giving Mike and Nicole the opportunity. Mark Engel also was going to be on this call, but he had a personal issue that he had to deal with. and he would have certainly added to this discussion in a very positive way. But I wanted to really thank the Chamber for giving us the opportunity to participate in this seminar. Mike and Nicole and the rest of our Employment and Labor Department, as you can imagine, have been really a great resource to have for me at the law firm here and managing through this pandemic. And I can honestly say that when we started this pandemic in March of 2020, that our employment lawyers like Mike and Nicole have been extremely busy, and they've been receiving calls off the line and writing articles, participating in seminars like this to really help our business community deal with this pandemic. And they've done it both internally and externally in a really professional and positive way. So I'm very proud of what they did today, what they've done in the past, what our law firm is doing, and really and more particularly for purposes of this, the Chamber. The Chamber has taken on this pandemic and has been a wealth of resources almost on a daily basis to provide members with just amazing information. And I can only encourage anybody who's on the line, which I can't see, but if you have a particular expertise that would be of value to the Chamber and our members, speak up, because Gigi's not bashful to highlight information that you know that might be helpful to our members. I truly do value what Mike and Nicole do. They do bring a sense of calmness to this pandemic, and I think our firm has done extremely well in dealing with it, but it's not over, and issues are changing every day. And I was sitting here listening like an active participant to this information, because it does change on, I don't know about a daily basis, but pretty darn close with the injunctions and everything else. So while I'm lucky to have these two by my side and our other employment and labor folks, I feel like we're very happy and proud to share our resources with you. So I just wanted to just take a minute to applaud the Chamber, to thank my colleagues for doing this, and to hope that everyone is weathering the storm and we're getting out of this, and hopefully a light is at the end of the tunnel. So thank you, Gigi. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Steve, so much. Very kind words about the Chamber, and you are so right. We keep those ideas coming because we want to make sure that all of our members and our entire community has the right information from the right experts at the right time, so that our business leaders, our business owners, all executive leaders in our community are making the best decisions they can, so that they can continue to grow and accelerate their success. And we're here to help make that happen. I wanted to say especially to Nicole and Michael, great presentation. And I want to also and say to Aaron Allen, thank you for continuing to chair with your co-chair, Cal Attia, also from Care First, who couldn't join us today. But our Business Accelerator series is all about the information that our businesses need to be successful. So thank you, Aaron, for being with us today to chair our meeting. As always, appreciate your support and guidance. And I wanted to thank all of you for joining us today. Your time is your most valuable resource, and you spent time with us today. And we hope that you found Nicole and Michael's presentation to be very helpful. As we said at the beginning, if you would like to receive any of this information, the presentation that they made, just send us an email, let us know at the Chamber, or pick up the phone and let us know that you would like to receive it. And with that, I'm going to say I think we've had a great discussion. Again, thank you, Nicole, Michael, Steve Robbins, Aaron Allen, and all of you for joining us today. Have a great holiday season. Travel safely, everybody, and we will see you again soon at our next Accelerator.